In this video, I want to discuss, hopefully in a quick way, some conclusions I've reached about internal validation and external validation. For example, there's that entire red pill ideological movement, like the POAs, the Rollo Tomassi clique, the red pill man, and various other related subcultures. And then you also have those who identify as the red pill MG Taos, right? Which are essentially functioning as the POAs. And the MG Taos are the only two groups in the manosphere who are willing to analyze female nature in a really cold, objective way. Not sugarcoating the negative aspects and only praising the positive ones like feminists do, like tradcucks do, but actually trying to understand women, how they really operate, and what their true nature is. So MGTOW and POA are the only two groups willing to do that. But the final conclusion of the PUAs is that they think they have to be the super cool guy. They have to be the high performance alpha male to be able to get access to a woman and to be able to keep a woman. And he thinks that if he's alpha or cool enough, or if he maintains his frame, the woman won't leave, won't commit paternity fraud, won't cheat, and he'll never find himself in front of a family court judge. And to sum it up, he thinks that no matter how much the risks increase, he bears the burden of performance. And if he keeps being a cool guy forever, he'll be fine. When in reality, in my view, that's just a coping mechanism, because he boasts to everyone, puffs out his chest saying he's super cool, but his coping is not admitting that in the end he's serving women. He's serving women, he's a servant to women. It doesn't matter if he's married or not, if he has kids or not, even if he's just having a casual relationship, using frame, his P-way techniques to have a casual relationship, he's serving the purpose of serving the women who are on the carousel of pigs and don't want anything serious. And in the same way, when he tries to use game frame to relate to his wife to keep the marriage healthy, he's also coping, because he's saying that he's in control of the situation, that he's the head of the family, that he's dominating everything there, when in reality he's serving the woman. The one who has all the legal power is his wife, and his wife can do whatever she wants with him, you understand? So that's coping. While MGTOW comes to the conclusion that the risk is too high, the price is too expensive, and it's like Stardust, who has said many times, you have two choices after. How does it go again? Isn't that right? You can love women or you can understand them. You can't do both things, right? And then with the red pill part, when you understand female nature, you reach a point that you even, in a way, start behaving with women the same way women behave with men, in a pragmatic way, right? You know that a woman won't love a man the same way a man loves a woman. That's not how it works, but after you understand female nature, you end up no longer being able to love them the way you used to. And you treat your relationship with her in a more utilitarian and transactional way. Basically, you only go after women and only stay in relationships with women because of sex or reproduction. Anyway, that's it. But then there's this divergence, right? MG Tau is willing to leave the market, while PUA always keeps themselves in the market. And so in a way, what we say is that MG Tao has developed internal validation, right? He doesn't validate himself. He doesn't feed his ego, his self-esteem through how other people, both men and women, or society as a whole sees him. He has his own goals, his own objectives. And as he sees himself aligning with those goals and objectives, he validates himself, and that's it. He is independent. Whereas with PUA, we often say it's about external validation, because all of his ego, all of his self-esteem is tied to how attractive he is to women. That's why I even said that the red pill from the PUAs, from Rolando Tomas's crowd, doesn't have validity for all men, because if the guy is really ugly, if the guy is disabled, what good is this red pill of his going to do? Is he ever, by any chance, going to reach a level where he tries to win over a modern woman, especially in a situation where there are women around? A 5 or 6 out of 10? Only wanting to go after guys who are 8s, 9s, and 10s? So anyway, but that's not what I want to talk about in this video. I think I've already covered enough of the introduction. But the conclusion I've come to lately is that it's not simply a distinction between internal and external validation. Internal validation is just one thing. It's just one, there are no divisions. It's basically about how much you are aligned with your goals, your aims, if you're living life the way you want to live, you know? Basically, you do what you want to do, when you want to do it, the way you want to do it, you know? That's what power is. You're not depending on others. But external validation isn't just one thing. It's not simply the validation you get from a woman. The conclusion I've come to is that external validation, there are 3 types of external validation. First, you have social external validation, which you receive from all of society, and it's connected to how much you are aligned with the culture, the religion, the traditions of your society, right? You can apply this both in times of conservatism, real, true conservatism, when a person was aligned with the goals of their nation, with patriotism, with religion. But you can also align it with the current moment, which is about how much someone is in tune with wokeness, with the social democratic state, you know? So basically, it's social validation, which depends on the era you're living in. In a way, it's connected to virtue signaling, that English expression for showing off your virtue that you want to display to others how virtuous you are because you're aligned with the prevailing culture, with the prevailing religion. We could even say that egalitarianism is the religion of the West. And this makes sense because I can't remember the author's name, but there was a guy I saw in some YouTube videos where they were discussing an author, I think someone from around the time of the Second World War, maybe even before that. And the original idea isn't his, it came from earlier thinkers, but it's related to that question of the ages of civilization and Kali Yuga. In short, every civilization, not just when we're talking about a nation or an empire, but human civilization as a whole, first goes through the age of priests, then the age of warriors, then the age of merchants, and finally the age of slaves. We're basically going through the transition from the age of merchants to the age of slaves. Anyone who wants to research this further, to go deeper into it, go ahead. I think the video I watched about this was from the channel The Asian Capitalist. I can't remember the title of the video, but anyway, I'm only mentioning this to illustrate how this external social validation is aligned with the era you're living in. For example, in the age of priests, external social validation was related to how much you were aligned with the prevailing religion of your community. Then, in the age of warriors, it was related to your martial ability, it was related to your patriotism, right? Then, when you get to the age of merchants, it's related to your purchasing power, to your socioeconomic status, right? And I think that in the age of slaves, maybe it's about how woke you are, right? Or how sexually attractive you are, right? Because then it's the age of promiscuity, right? Newman is going to love that expression. But notice something else too, how these social values, you can see that in the age of priests and in the age of warriors, these are more masculine values, right? Basically more related to virtue, self-control, and development. And then later, when you get to the age of merchants and the age of slaves, it's more related to consumerism, purchasing power, hedonism. It's more connected to feminine values. However, moving forward with this discussion, so first you have the concept of general social validation. Then you have male social validation, which is specifically about how much you are deeply respected, highly valued, and widely admired by the other men within your specific community and broader society. Both men who are part of your personal life, your group, it could be an academic or professional group, or a circle of friends or family members. It's basically about how much you are valued, admired, and respected by the men in your society. And notice the following. This is an extension of social validation because it's also related to the cultural and religious values, the traditions, the culture of your society, you know? So, in a way, when you're in the era, let's say, of priests and warriors, the value you receive as a man from other men will be one thing. It will be related, I don't know, to your wisdom, your military capability, your physical strength. Then later, when you get to the era of merchants and the era of debauchery, of slaves, it will be related to how physically attractive you are to women, how many women you've slept with, right? How much money you have in your wallet or in your bank account, because then it's already the era of hedonism. And then finally, you have external female validation, which is how attractive you are, how much you are admired by the females in your society. And in this case, it's a bit simpler because it's not tied to the era you're living in. Because basically, what does the female seek? Female imperative. To obtain the greatest amount of resources and benefits with the least amount of effort and responsibility. Women seek men for protection and provision, and this doesn't change in any era. The only difference you could say is that, let's say in the era of merchants and in the era of promiscuity, of hedonism, of slaves, women, basically, since they're also receiving protection and provision from the state, they start to focus more on seeking hedonism, seeking sex, or the alpha, fax, beta, bucks. We can talk about the rule, the 80-20 rule, right? Basically, when a woman is very young, attractive, and fertile, she goes after a genetic alpha, not a guy with status or resources or who's responsible. No, just the guy with the best genetic material. She goes, sleeps with him, and has kids with him. And then she passes the bill to the government or to the big beta who will take care of her later. But anyway, to sum it up, first, you have the social validation from society as a whole, which is related to the culture, religion, and traditions of the society you live in. Then you have external male validation, which is about how much you are respected and admired by other men in your society. And then you have external female validation, which is about how attractive you are to women. Depending on the society and the era you live in, this will be more related either to your status and resources or to your sexual performance and genetic material. Anyway, so what's the distinction? I've already said that, for example, MG Tau, external validation, forget it, it's garbage. What matters is internal validation. There might be a certain kind of external validation, but it's more micro, more focused, and it's related to the other men in your community, how much you are respected and admired by the men in the community you belong to, right? And also, this external validation is basically related to a mix of social validation and male validation, but on a micro scale. Basically, your MGTOW, you have your internal validation, but you also have external validation within the community. MGTOW, which is a community of men you respect and admire, and in return, they also respect and admire you, right? So it's something very concentrated if there even is such a thing as external validation for MGTOW. What I can say is this, that probably the patriarchs of the past, I'm talking about our grandfathers, our great grandfathers, really our ancestors, all the men before the second wave of feminism in the 1960s and 1970s, maybe even before the first wave of feminism in the 1920s and 1930s. What I can analyze and see is that the external validation for those men from those times, the most important ones, the two most important, were social validation, aligned with culture, nationalism, and so on. An external male validation, how much a man was respected and admired by other men in the community where he lived. After all, there were gender roles and there wasn't this foolish idea that men and women are the same. Obviously, it was recognized that women were beneath men, that men were responsible for women, and that women were dependent on them. So what I can say is that the patriarchs of the past had social validation and male validation, and if there was any female validation, it was the lowest of the three forms of external validation. Whereas, if you carefully examine and analyze Nai as a primary illustrative example, the Conservatives 2.0, the Marianists, and the current trade cucks, you will see they possess an exceptionally high level of social external validation. And they also have significant validation from the opposite sex. High, maybe even higher female validation than social validation, because they want to be seen as good fathers, good husbands, good providers. And why do I say that female validation is also very high? Because they keep giving women rights and privileges left and right. They accept being in an arrangement where they are the husband and father, but the woman has much more power. The woman is the one with authority at home. In fact, Marianists put women on a pedestal as if she were a goddess, a demigoddess, and their role is to serve. And why do I say that in the case of these men, the treadcucks, male validation is the lowest. It's below social and female validation. Because look at how much they approve laws that will punish other men, how little they care about other men, how much they screw over other men. So the external validation of the tradicates is totally focused on the social aspect. And then, of course, if we're living in a gynocentric society, how are they going to get their social validation? By being the biggest simp in the world? And treating his little goddess, his virtuous little wife, like royalty, right? And then finally, we have the validation, external validation for the P-way. The player, the seduction guru, the relationship coach, which then, in this specific case, he also clearly has. And I firmly believe that this is indeed the situation. In his case, his social validation is the lowest for society as a whole. The guy doesn't care if he's seen as a jerk or not, whatever, it doesn't matter. And his male validation as well, it's kind of concentrated. His male validation is only for his little group, for the group of POAs, the players, like they admire each other, they respect each other, right? But the social validation is low because they don't care about society. They just want to have fun. I think it was even that woman from the Red Pill documentary who said, right, that there was In the red pill community, you have the MGTOWs who don't care about society. They don't want to keep supporting a society that doesn't give a damn about them. And then you have the POAs, who are the guys that just want to enjoy the party. They know society is going down the drain, but they just want to throw themselves into the hedonism of casual relationships and rack up as many sexual partners as possible. Because that's also how they validate themselves, through female validation, right? So you could say that the POAs, they don't care about society either. In fact, my theory is that yes means yes and me too, which are these false accusations from women, grew and actually emerged precisely because of the POS, because they learned how to take advantage of the totally liberated sexual marketplace and analyze female nature, but just to throw themselves into a hedonistic relationship. And as the years and decades went by and these guys kept accumulating sexual partners without marrying them, without having children with them, the women started to get pissed off and began demanding that the government tighten the restrictions on men more and more. Doing what? Uh, Getting rid of, for example, the legal definition of illegitimate child, right? Turning cohabitation automatically into marriage, legalizing divorce and granting custody only to them, and now, with this part, also wanting to legalize abortion and giving sole custody of the children only to them. Now only their accusations matter. I mean, all of this is always a game of action and reaction, but I believe that this thing about women wanting to pressure men more and more is precisely because of the POAs, because the POAs, they're those guys who don't want to commit. Whereas the majority of the male population is made up of betas who do want to commit. So in that sense, women wouldn't see a big problem with it. But anyway, in the end, the POAs, their social validation from society as a whole is low, right? They don't care at all about society. They might have a little bit of social validation maybe, but it's just within their own small group. And a kind of male validation that only comes from their own little group, which is obviously aligned with the values of the community, those values of hedonism and all that nonsense about frame, being a badass, and so on. But again, just like the tradcons, their main external validation comes from women. In fact, for anyone who has read the book The Rational Male by Rollo Tomasi, at the beginning of the book, he says that a guy has to be spinning plates, hitting on several women at the same time. He has to develop that abundance mindset, which is related to how attractive he is to multiple women. So he has to be a high performance player all the time, because the moment he no longer feels attractive to other women, when he stops receiving that female validation, his self-esteem will tank and he'll start to feel like garbage. So again, just to sum up and wrap up the video, you have internal validation and you have the three types of external validation: social validation, male validation, female validation. If you look at the patriarchs, the true conservatives from the past, their two main forms of validation were the social validation from the whole society and male validation, and only in last place came female validation. If you look at the tradcons, the so-called conservatives 2.0, the tradcucks, their social validation is high, their male validation is extremely low, and their female validation is as high as their social validation, maybe even higher. And then if you look at the pieways, their male validation is high or medium, but it's only within their own little group. Their social validation is also only related to their own little group. For society as a whole, not so much, right? Or maybe it's just related to wanting to be the guy who's really well off financially. So it's not something that's connected to tradition or culture or religion. No, it's just consumerism and hedonism. So you can't really say it's a high level of social validation. Maybe it's a selective validation, just like their masculine validation is selective. But their female validation is higher, also just like the tradcucks. Actually, it's not even on the same level as the others. It's really high. So much so that, in general, POAs use any kind of deflection to explain why they're never willing to give up women. Because if you give up on women, dedicate yourself to a life of celibacy because the risks are too high, the laws are too bad, then you're being a coward, right? Either you're afraid or whatever. To put it quite simply, when POAs attain these specific and extreme levels of psychological deflection, their coping mechanisms shift and they start behaving in a manner that is somewhat reminiscent of a mix of feminists, right? And a mix of tradicons. I've said it a few times already that POAs are the new tradicons. Just look at how they react to pornography, to sex dolls lately. So basically that's it. And I think that, as you can see, like that issue of the trichotomy as a mass of the population, they have some values that are above the others. This also ties in a bit with my micro and macro theory that every kind of human dynamic, of human interaction, not just romantic or sexual relationships, but every kind of human social relationship, everything you validate on the micro level in a family or a couple, you also validate on the macro level when you look at the masses. So just like you have the issue of the trichotomy, political trichotomy, you have the communists whose highest value is equality, you have the individualists whose highest value is freedom, and then you have the absolutists whose highest value is stability. In the same way, when you look at some groups of men, for example, the patriarchal conservatives from the past, and then you compare them, for instance, with today's tradcons, right? Then you compare them with the PUAs. So you see that this is also related. In this, there are also some values that are more important, and that's how groups end up forming. And then we can see that maybe feminists are kind of a mix between tradcons and PUAs. Maybe in this case, feminists get a ton of social validation from today's woke society and a higher level of female validation, even above that social validation. And then, in this case, male validation must also be low because they themselves probably assimilate the discourse of today's women, that all men are trash. But I think it's an interesting issue, and I'm going to try to develop this a bit more. But with this, you can analyze and categorize well the different types of men you interact with, both individually and in groups.